My name is William Rook, and in the spring of 1873, I sat down for dinner with a family of devils in Labette County, Kansas. If not for the grace of God and the instincts of a tired traveler, my bones would be fertilizing the soil of their apple orchard right now. The West was a hard place then. Lonely. After the war, people were moving, looking for a fresh start. The Osage Trail was a main artery for pioneers, cowboys, and drifters. And along that trail, about halfway between the towns of Thayer and Osage Mission, stood a small, one-room inn and general store. It was run by a family of German immigrants, the Benders. There was Pa, a big, grim man who barely spoke English. Ma, a heavy-set woman with a cruel face who was said to be the real leader. John Jenner, a lanky, simple-minded fellow who laughed at strange times. And then there was Kate. Kate Bender was about my age, maybe 24. She was attractive, vivacious, but there was something unsettling about her. She claimed to be a psychic, a healer. She put up flyers advertising her spiritual powers. People were drawn to her. She was the friendly face of the Bender Inn, the bait in the trap. I'd been on the road for 2 days and was bone-weary. The Bender Inn was the only sign of civilization for miles. I pulled my horse up. The building was flimsy, hastily built. It was divided in two by a large canvas wagon cover, hung from the ceiling. One side was the store and kitchen. The other side, behind the canvas, was the family's living quarters. Kate greeted me at the door. Her smile was wide, but it didn't reach her eyes. She invited me in, offered me a meal. I was hungry and tired, so I accepted. She sat me at the small wooden table. I noticed something odd right away. The table was pushed right up against the canvas divider. My back was to it. There was only one chair at that spot, the seat of honor. Kate called it, laughing. I was uneasy. The whole family was there, watching me. Pi and John Jenner were sharpening knives in the corner, not even trying to be discreet. Ma was stoking the fire, her eyes constantly flicking towards me. The air was thick with a tension I couldn't name. Kate did all the talking. She asked me where I was from, where I was going. She asked if I was traveling with much money. She said it so casually, like she was just making conversation. But the way her father looked up when she said the word money, it sent a chill down my spine. I'm not a rich man, but I was carrying a decent sum to buy some land. A foolish instinct, a gut feeling, made me lie. I told her I was just a poor farmhand, that I'd lost most of my money in a card game back in Independence. I saw a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Ma Bender slammed a pot down on the stove. They served me dinner. It was meager, but I was grateful for it. As I ate, I tried to make small talk, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Except for Kate, who kept asking me probing questions. She leaned in close, telling me about her psychic abilities, offering to give me a reading. She said she could contact the spirits of the dead. As she was talking, I heard a sound from behind the canvas. A soft scraping sound, and then a dull clang like someone had dropped a heavy hammer onto a dirt floor. Pi and John Jenner both froze, their eyes darting towards the canvas, then towards me. Kate's smile tightened. She tried to cover the noise by laughing loudly at something I hadn't said. That's when I knew. I didn't know what I knew, but I knew I had to get out of there. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt like a rabbit in a den of wolves. The seat of honor, my back was completely exposed to whatever was behind that canvas sheet. I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair over. "Thank you for the meal," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "But I just remembered I have to meet a man in Osage Mission before morning. I have to go." Their faces changed. Kate's false smile vanished, replaced by a cold fury. Ma Bender took a step towards me, her hands clenched into fists. Pa stood up, the knife still in his hand. "You're not going anywhere," Ma grunted in her thick accent. "Sit down." I didn't hesitate. I threw a few coins on the table and bolted for the door. John Jenner lunged for me, but he was clumsy, and I dodged him. I threw the door open and ran into the night, not even bothering to untie my horse. I just ran down the trail, into the darkness, expecting to hear a gunshot at any moment. But none came. I suppose they didn't want to draw attention. I didn't stop running until I reached the next town. I told my story to the sheriff. He listened, but with all the travelers disappearing on the trail, one man's story of a strange family wasn't enough to act on. It wasn't until a few weeks later, when a prominent doctor and his brother went missing, that a real search party was organized. They went to the Bender Inn. They found it abandoned. The family was gone, but they left their secrets behind. There was a smell in the cabin, a terrible, rotten smell. The search party noticed the earth in the vegetable garden, and the apple orchard looked disturbed. They started digging. They found the doctor first, then his brother, then another man, and another. They found 11 bodies buried in that orchard. All of them had their skulls crushed. And in the cabin, behind where the canvas divider hung, they found the trap door. It was on the floor, right behind the seat of honor. Underneath was a small, dark cellar stained with blood. Their system was simple. Kate would distract the traveler, usually a man with money and no family. When he was seated at the table, his back to the canvas, either Pye or John Jr. would be waiting behind it. They would swing a sledgehammer through a small slit in the canvas, crushing the man's skull. He would fall backwards, and they would drop his body through the trap door into the cellar to bleed out. Then they would rob him and bury him in the garden at night. My lie saved my life, because I wasn't worth the effort. The clang I heard, it was the sound of the hammer being dropped, or picked up. They were getting ready for me. They were never caught. The Bender's pa, Mott John Jr., and Kate vanished. Some say they were caught and killed by a vigilante mob. Others say they escaped, changed their names, and started over somewhere else. I don't know what happened to them, but I know this. Evil isn't always a ghost or a demon. Sometimes, it's a smiling girl who offers you a hot meal on a cold night, and it waits for you to turn your back. My name is Dr. George Millerbeard. I am a neurologist. My life's work is the study of the nervous system, of the strange and often terrifying ways the human mind can betray the body. In 1878, I traveled to the Moosehead Lake region of Maine, a remote area populated largely by French-Canadian lumberjacks. I had heard rumors of a peculiar and alarming affliction, and I had to see it for myself. What I found there was not a disease of the body, but a disease of the will, a complete and horrifying surrender of self-control. It was known locally as the curse of the jumping Frenchman. The subjects were all men, all of French-Canadian descent, all working in the isolated, physically demanding logging camps. They were healthy, strong individuals, but they suffered from an exaggerated, almost violent, startle reflex. My first subject was a man named George Gagnon. He was 50 years old, powerfully built. I met him in his small cabin. To begin, I simply made a sudden, loud noise. Most people would jump, perhaps cry out. Mr. Gagnon, however, did not just jump. He screamed, threw his arms in the air, and his body spasmed as if he'd been struck by lightning. This was the mildest of the manifestations. The truly terrifying aspect of this condition was what happened when they were startled by a command. I took a step towards Mr. Gagnon and shouted, "Strike!" He instantly, without a moment's hesitation, struck the man standing next to him, a friend of his. He looked horrified at his own action, apologizing profusely, but his body had obeyed my command, not his own mind. I tested this again. I pointed at his chair and barked, "Throw it!" He immediately seized the heavy wooden chair and hurled it across the room. There was no thought, no processing. The sound of the command was a direct wire to his muscles, bypassing his will entirely. It was as if the order itself was the stimulus, and the action was the involuntary reflex. I experimented further with other men who suffered from the same affliction. I found a man named Gene. I held a small axe in my hand. I told him if I threw the axe at him, he was to dodge it. He agreed, understanding the instruction completely. I then shouted, "Throw it," and made a motion as if to toss the axe at another person. Gene, instead of dodging, snatched the axe from my hand and threw it himself, exactly as he was commanded, even though it went against my prior instructions and his own self-preservation. He was horrified. He could have killed someone. The most disturbing manifestation was the echolalia and echopraxia. They would not only obey commands, but they would repeat them. If I shouted, "Jump," they would shout, "Jump," as they leaped into the air. If I spoke a phrase in a language they did not understand, I tried Latin and Greek. They would repeat the sounds back to me perfectly, like a parrot. Even while performing the startle reflex, they would mimic actions too. If I suddenly slapped my own face, they would slap their own. I documented case after case. A man who, when startled by the command, "Kiss the dog," immediately bent down and kissed a mangy camp dog. A man who, when a gun was fired unexpectedly, would not just jump, but would run 100 yards into the forest before he could regain control of himself. These were not simple men playing a prank. The fear and shame on their faces after each episode was genuine. They were prisoners in their own bodies. They were terrified of sudden noises, of being near people. They were ostracized, treated as fools or clowns by those who didn't understand. Other lumberjacks would startle them for sport, commanding them to jump in the river or hit their own brother, and then laugh as the poor man was forced to obey. What was the source of this horror? I could not find a physical cause. It seemed to be isolated to this specific community. Was it genetic? A result of the harsh, isolated life in the logging camps? Was it, as some of the men believed, a form of curse? I called it a nervous disease, a disorder of the inhibitory functions of the brain. But that's just a label. It doesn't capture the sheer terror of it. Imagine for a moment. Imagine for your mind. Your consciousness, your very soul, is nothing but a passenger. A helpless observer trapped behind the eyes of a body that is not under your control. Imagine that any sudden sound, any sharp command from a stranger, could force you to harm yourself, to harm someone you love, to perform any humiliating or dangerous act, and you are powerless to stop it. You can only watch as your own hands betray you. This is not the horror of a ghost or a monster from the outside. This is the horror of the monster within. The chilling realization that the link between who you are and what you do can be so easily, so completely, severed. The jumping Frenchmen of Maine were not haunted by a spirit. They were haunted by the terrifying fragility of their own free will. And that, to a man of science, is the most frightening concept of all. My name is Pearl, and for a year I was followed by a shadow that wasn't my own. It didn't live in my house, it lived with me. This wasn't on the mainland. This was on Tancook Island, off the coast of Nova Scotia in 1899. On an island you can't run, there's nowhere to go. It started subtly, a feeling. The kind of feeling you get when you're walking home at dusk, and the hairs on your arms stand up. You turn around, and there's nothing there. But you just know you are not alone. That feeling became my constant companion. I was 16. I lived with my parents in a small, sturdy house by the sea. One evening, I was in the kitchen, helping my mother. I glanced towards the doorway that led to the parlor. For just a second I saw him, a tall, dark shape, a man but with no features, just a silhouette darker than the shadows around it. I blinked, and he was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but I saw him again a few nights later, standing at the foot of my bed. I woke up with that cold feeling of being watched. I opened my eyes, and he was there, a pillar of blackness in the moonlight. He had no face, no clothes I could make out, just the shape of a man. I was too scared to scream. I squeezed my eyes shut, and when I opened them again, he was gone. I told my parents. My father, a practical, hard-working fisherman, searched the house. He found nothing. My mother held me, told me it was just a nightmare, but they started leaving a lamp burning in my room all night. It didn't help. The shadow wasn't afraid of the light. It grew bolder. I would hear footsteps following me when I walked down the dirt road. Heavy, masculine footsteps on the gravel behind me. When I'd spin around, there was never anyone there. But the sound, it was so real. Then it started touching me. It was a cold touch. I'd be sitting, reading, and I'd feel an icy pressure on my shoulder, like a hand was resting there. I'd be asleep, and something would stroke my hair. A touch so cold it felt like it was burning. I would wake up sobbing, but there was never anyone there. The community on Tancook is small. Word gets around. People started to look at me differently. The other girls would whisper when I walked by. They called me Spooky Pearl. Some thought I was making it up for attention. Others, the more religious ones, thought I was cursed, or worse, that I had invited something evil into my life. I became as isolated as the island itself. My family, thank God, they believed me. They saw my terror. They saw the dark circles under my eyes. They saw how I'd jump at every little sound. One night, my father had had enough. He was a deacon at the church. He was a man of faith. He sat in my room with his Bible. He said, "Tonight we will face this thing." As the night grew deeper, the cold settled in the room. I could feel it coming. The air grew thick, heavy. I could hear it breathing, a slow, rasping sound that seemed to come from right beside my ear. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to show yourself." My father's voice boomed, shaking with a fear he was trying to hide. The shadow appeared. It wasn't standing at the foot of the bed this time. It was huddled in the corner of the room, near the ceiling. A dark, condensed mass of black. It looked smaller, cowed. "Who are you? What do you want?" my father demanded. A voice answered. It wasn't a sound that came from the shadow. It was a voice that was suddenly just in our heads. It was faint, whispery, and full of sorrow. "I am lost," it said. That was all. My father prayed then, a long, fervent prayer, asking God to guide the lost soul to its rest. As he prayed, the shadow in the corner seemed to shrink, to fade. It dissolved into nothing, like smoke in the wind. The cold in the room vanished. The heavy feeling in the air lifted. It was gone. It never came back. The footsteps stopped. The cold touches ended. The feeling of being watched finally left me. I don't know who or what it was. Was it the ghost of a drowned sailor, lost in the fog? Was it something else, something older? All I know is that it was real. It was a lonely, sad thing, and its sorrow was so powerful it became a physical presence. It latched onto me, maybe because I was young, maybe just because I was there. The whispers in the community eventually faded. I grew up, but I never forgot the Shadow Man, and I never forgot what it felt like to be haunted. It's a loneliness so profound. It's like you're the only person left in the world, and there's a shadow standing right next to you. My name is Jane Alsop, and on the night of February 19th, 1838, in a quiet suburb of London, I opened my door to a monster. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a demon from a book. He was flesh and blood, and he was terrifyingly, impossibly real. They called him Spring-Heeled Jack. It was late, past 9 o'clock. My father and my sisters were in the house. There was a violent ringing at our front gate. I was hesitant to answer, but the person shouted that they were a policeman. They said they'd captured Spring-Heeled Jack in the lane and needed a light. Of course, we'd all heard the stories. For months, London had been gripped by fear of this figure. A tall, dark man who could leap over walls and rooftops. A devilish creature who attacked women, breathing fire in their faces. We thought they were just that, stories. Tall tales to frighten children. So, wanting to help the police, I took a candle and went to the front door. I opened it. The man standing there was tall, silhouetted against the dark. He was wearing a large cloak, like an officer might. "I am a policeman," he said, his voice strangely high-pitched. "For God's sake, bring me a light, for we have caught Spring-Heeled Jack here in the lane." I stepped out onto the porch, holding the candle up. He turned towards me, and the candle flame illuminated his face. He wasn't wearing a uniform. Under the cloak, he was wearing some kind of tight-fitting, white oilskin suit. It looked like something a diver might wear. And his eyes, God, his eyes. They were glowing, like red-hot coals. They seemed to burn in the darkness. He didn't look like a man. He looked like a devil. Before I could scream, he threw off the cloak and lunged at me. He didn't run, he bounded. He moved with a horrifying, unnatural agility. He grabbed my gown and began tearing at it with his hands. But his hands weren't normal. His fingers were tipped with what felt like sharp, metallic claws. They were ice cold and raked across my neck and arms, drawing blood. I screamed then, a raw, piercing sound. He didn't say a word. He just held me, his glowing eyes fixed on mine. And then the most impossible thing happened. He opened his mouth, and he spat a stream of blue and white flame right into my face. It didn't burn like fire. It was a cold flame, but it blinded me, and the smell was sulfurous, choking. I felt like I was going to faint from the sheer terror of it. My sister heard my screams. She ran to the door and managed to pull me back inside, away from him. The man, the creature, didn't try to follow. He just stood there for a moment on the porch. He let out a strange, croaking laugh. Then he turned and bounded away into the darkness, leaping over the high gate with impossible ease. The police came. The real police. They saw my torn dress, the deep bleeding scratches on my neck and arms. They saw the terror in my family's eyes. They took my statement. They took it seriously. My attack, and another one just days later on a girl named Lucy Scales, proved that Spring-Heeled Jack was not a myth. He was a real physical menace. But what was he? No one ever found out. The attacks continued on and off for decades. The descriptions were always the same. The tall athletic figure, the glowing eyes, the metallic claws, the ability to leap incredible heights, the terrifying blue flame. Was he just a man? A mad nobleman playing a cruel, elaborate prank? If so, how did he perform his incredible feats? How did he create the flames? How did he evade capture for so long? Some said he had springs built into his boots, hence the name. But no one ever found any proof. Others had darker theories. That he wasn't a man at all. That he was an entity from another place. A demon stalking the gaslit streets of London. I don't know what he was. I only know what he felt like. His grip was real. His claws were real. The cold dread that filled me when I saw his burning eyes was the most real thing I have ever felt. He was never caught. He just faded away. The stories stopped. The sightings ceased. He melted back into the shadows from whence he came. But for me, he never left. Every time I hear a sudden noise at the door, every time I walk down a dark street, I see him. I see those glowing red eyes. And I remember that sometimes, the things that go bump in the night aren't just in your head. Sometimes they're standing on your doorstep, pretending to be the police,